Do you want to know my secret, how I dial in coffee, especially for espresso? I'll walk you through step by step what you need to know and how to do the process. Now, the very first thing you need to keep in mind, it is the kind of coffee you're using. Like I said before in my previous video, you can use any roast profile, any processing method to make your coffee, but you need to know exactly which roast profile, which processing method, which altitude you're using. That is, you understanding the coffee, because if you understand the coffee, you know exactly how to brew the coffee. And I'll explain. Now, during the roasting process, the more the roaster exposes the coffee to heat, the easier the water can extract the coffee because the beans are porous. Now, the lighter the roast, it means it will have less time in the roasting process, the more intact the bean will be. So definitely it is hard for the water to really extract the compounds from the coffee. So if you use a light roast coffee for your espresso, you have more work to do because that 30 seconds brew time, it is really challenging. But again, you still have a tasting cup of coffee if you understand how to brew the coffee. Now, most of the time, if the barista do have a light roast coffee, they always want to increase the water temperature or the pressure, but that is not the case because in the future, you will see why temperature is not really important when it comes to this situation. Understanding the processing method, it is really important because we have things like wash, honey, natural, anaerobic, carbonic maceration, lactic fermentation. All these processing methods do have impact in the brewing process. For example, if you do have an aerobic process to brew the same coffee for espresso and you have wash coffee, these two coffees are really different because the more the coffee undergo a certain process or a certain processing method, the more easier or the more porous the bean will come. Now, the altitude, the higher the altitude, the more dense the bean will be. And then it is really hard. But again, you can still have high altitude. But during the roasting process, they roast the coffee in a more like developed or dark roast coffee. So it is really different. So it is for you to understand your roast profile, understand all these things because they'll play a great role in your extraction. So if you have an idea what kind of coffee you're using, the next thing it is the machine you're using. The machine you're using as well is really important because we do have different machines out there. For some machines, we the baristas, we have powers to manipulate, to change, let's say the water temperature, the pressure, you name it as well. For some other machines, we have less power, less control to change things. For example, my SAP espresso machine, I have less control when it comes to, let's say, the water temperature, the pressure, or even if I need to change, it will take me really long time. That is why I said to understand your machine is really important. For example, if you do have, let's say, a light roast coffee, and you need to brew that coffee for espresso, and you have a heat exchange machine where you can't, or a single boiler machine where you can't change things, it is really hard. That is why I said before, temperature is not always the solution. In the future, we'll see why ratio, grind size, they are really important when you brew coffee, especially for espresso. Like I said before, we have dual boiler machines, heat exchange machines, single boiler machines, thermoblock machines, and all these machines do have different ways they react in coffee. For the dual boiler machine, we can mostly manipulate with different things because we have more PID controllers. For heat exchange machine, you do have just one. So if you change the steam, it will affect the brew. If you change the brew, it will affect the steam. So these things we need to put in consideration. Now, if you understand exactly how to choose your coffee, what kind of coffee you're using, the kind of machine you're using, then it is time to brew the coffee. Now, when it comes to brewing the coffee, we have a lot of things to put in consideration. Number one, the dose. The dose here, it is the amount of ground coffee that you definitely start with. It is just like the anchor of every espresso preparation. So anytime you think about making espresso, you always think about the dose. The dose is really important. Now, most of the time, baristas always go for more dose. Now, for me, more dose is not always the solution. Lesser dose, you give less work to the machine, and the machine will extract more compounds. Most of the question baristas or beginner baristas always ask is, how can I know the exact dose, the perfect dose when I make my coffee? Now, to know or to choose the right dose for your espresso, number one, you need to know your basket size. The basket size will determine how much ground coffee you definitely start with. Now, most of the machines out there don't have basket sizes, but most of the VST baskets do come with sizes. So you have like 20 grams basket, 18 gram basket. Now, if you say like 18 gram basket or 20 gram basket, you can go plus or minus 2 grams when it comes to your coffee. Because more dose in a smaller basket, you have problems in extraction because the water can't extract the thing evenly, as well as if you use a bigger basket with a smaller dose, the water, when the water hits the coffee ground, it will disrupt the coffee bed, so it may lead to uneven extraction. And the next thing you need to understand also to choose the right dose or to make an informed decision, it is the kind of machine you're using. The kind of machine you're using also determines what kind of dose you definitely start with, because different machines will deliver pressure differently. So if you understand your dose, let's talk about the grind size. Now, this is one of the things I pay more attention when it comes to brewing coffee, because understanding your grinder, how it works, it is really important. Now, most of the time, baristas don't really understand how this thing actually functions. But again, the way I learned to make coffee is that when I brew my coffee and the coffee is under extracted, it means the contact time between the water and the coffee is not enough to extract more sugars to balance up the extraction. So what I have to do, I will go more finer. The finer you go, the more smaller the particles will be, the more it will fit inside your basket, the more it will create more resistance to increase your brew time. If you come coarse, you make the particles to be bigger, and then you reduce the contact time, the resistance. That's just what is happening in the process. And that is why you need to understand when to go fine and when to leave it alone. Now, at some point, we go fine on the point where the coffee starts to taste sour. And then baristas like, why the coffee tastes sour? The coffee should be bitter because it's already above 30 seconds, above maybe it's around 35 seconds, 36 seconds, and the coffee tastes sour. That is because, like I said before, when the coffee particle fit inside the basket, the heart rate for the water to go through inside extract all the compounds. So at some point, the water can't extract everything. So part will be extracted and part will not be. And that is why you end up having a sour cup of coffee. So it's important for you to understand when to leave it alone. Now, if you know how your grinder actually works, it means when you change your grind size, you are doing two things at the same time. You're changing contact time and the brew time. So you should keep in mind. So you go fine and coarse until you achieve your desired output. It means whatever thing the grinder gives to the espresso machine, that is exactly what the machine will produce. Let's talk about the ratio. Now, when it comes to ratio as well, I pay more attention when it comes to ratio, because the ratio is the relationship between the water and the coffee, how much water you use to brew the coffee, which is really important. Now, like I said before, the more water you pass through that bed of coffee, the weaker the strength of the coffee. The less water you pass through, the more the strength of the coffee. However, the industry do have a guide how to extract espresso shot, which is they give a ratio which is 1 to 2 to 1 to 2.5 up to 1 to 3 brew ratio. So with this range, you can make a tasty cup of coffee. And most of the time, as beginner barista or people get into coffee, or even if professional baristas, the ratio, we always use 1 to 2 brew ratio, which is, again, is okay because we mostly use, let's say, medium to dark roast or dark roast coffee, which is absolutely fine. But what if you have a light roast coffee? And that is why I said grind settings and ratio, they are really important when you brew coffee, because these two things, you can use any machine the way you want and you have great cup of coffee. It means if I use a heat exchange machine or single boiler machine, I can play only with my grind size or my grind settings and my ratio to get a tasting cup. Why? Because now, like I said before, when you go fine, you expose more surface area to creating more resistance. You come coarse, you make the particles to be a little bit bigger, right? And the ratio is like when you brew the coffee, if you notice any changes, for example, if you brew the coffee and you notice that the coffee do have a slight acidity, but it's already around 29 or 30 seconds, you just need to increase your ratio to pass a little bit more water to clean up that situation. That is just how ratio actually works. Now, the problem with many baristas is that they always go to change things, change pressure, change this. No, just the ratio and your grind. Now, they are important. These things, they are really important, like the water quality, everything is really important. But what if you don't have the opportunity to have those things? Now, the next thing I will talk is the brew time. The brew time here, it is important. Now, it helps us to track the changes of a variable from one stage to another. And the time as well determines if the coffee is over-extracted, if the coffee is under-extracted, or if it's the ideal extraction. That is why the time is really important. For example, you can brew your coffee and then let's say you have 18 grams in, but you don't track the output. You don't know if the coffee is over-extracted or the coffee is under-extracted. And what if the coffee is good? You will not have an idea, you will not have enough data for that. But when it comes to brew time, for me, I think brew time is for beginner baristas who get into coffee already. People already into coffee as professional baristas. For me, I don't see time like really big deal to them because they already have the ability to taste. Because in the future, we'll see why time is not really important for professional baristas. Now, if you have idea like what kind of machine you're using, the kind of coffee, how to choose the grind size and all those things, now let's see how to dial in the coffee. So to dial in the coffee, first I always suggest start with your normal recipe. Especially coffee you have no idea, start with your normal recipe. For example, you start with 20 grams of coffee and you aim around 40 ml as a liquid espresso, let's say in 25 to 30 seconds. This is for beginner barista. For professional baristas, when you extract the coffee with your normal recipe, let's say 20 grams in, 40 out, first you taste the coffee, forget about the time, taste the coffee, because our palate is the final say. Even if we have refractometers to track the percentage of extraction, TDS, caffeine and all those things, our palate is the final stage. So if our palate don't like accept it, then we need to change it. So you brew it, you taste it, you track it. From there, you make an informed decision if you are going fine or you are going coarse. Now, let's say the coffee is under extracted, or maybe the coffee is not under extracted, but the coffee do have a little bit of bitterness. So what you have to do, you can either maybe reduce your dose or reduce your ratio, or you change your grind size. But again, keep in mind that anytime you change your grind size, you have to grind some coffee and you waste. That is just like wastage. So to avoid that, before you change the grind size, you can change your ratio. You can change your ratio. You can increase a little bit more your ratio so you can clean up that situation, or you can reduce your ratio to clean up the situation. For beginner baristas, when you dial in the coffee, let's say you have 20 grams in and 40 ml out, and then the time is around 25 to 30 seconds. But if the time is like, let's say below 25 seconds, let's say 18 seconds, 19 seconds, it means the coffee is under extracted. Or if the coffee is above 30 seconds, it means the coffee is over extracted. Here you just go to the grinder, you go more finer. When you go more finer, then you need to create in more resistance, creating more extraction. That is just for the people getting into coffee. So now, when you dial in the coffee, you can only know the perfect grind size, because I think that is one of the biggest problems baristas always ask. One of the biggest problems beginner baristas or baristas do ask, it is how to know the perfect grind size when I make my coffee. And I think it's a point of concern as well. Now, when it comes to choosing the right grind size for your espresso, it is like, for me, I can't give a proper answer for that. But again, I can help you. Like I said before, for you to know the grind size, you start your normal recipe, your normal thing. You brew the coffee, you track the coffee. Now, the only time you make confirmation for that grind size, it is when the coffee is balanced for a professional barista. When the coffee is balanced, it means when you taste the coffee, you have that balanced sweetness, balanced acidity, balanced body, everything is okay. Then that is the grind size for, number one, that particular coffee, that particular machine, that particular grinder, that particular processing method, or that particular altitude. Now, why? Because the moment you change the grinder, you have different extraction. The moment you change your espresso machine, you have different extraction. The moment you change the coffee as well, you have different extraction. Just like the beginner baristas also, when you already have your sweet spot, which is around 25 to 30 seconds, it means that is the right grind size for that coffee, that machine, that processing method, that roast profile. It means if you use a more developed roast coffee, it means you need to change things completely. So that is something we really need to understand. So now, what if, let's say you're a barista and then you have, let's say, a light roast coffee to brew for espresso? Here you need some extra work to do. For example, like I said before, the lighter the roast, the more intact the bean will be, so it is hard for the water to extract the coffee. It means here the coffee would always taste acidic or sour. So when it comes to this particular situation, you should keep in mind that your dose will be something you need to work on. So if your starting point is always 20 grams dose, when it comes to light roast coffee, I really recommend you can reduce your dose, let's say even to 18, 17 grams, because you need less dose so the water can extract more of the compounds, as well as your grind settings. Now, one of the things you need to understand also, it is the ratio. Now, for the ratio, I strongly recommend go for a bigger ratio. Let's say if your starting point is, let's say 1 to 2 ratio for espresso, you can go up to to 1 to 2.5 to 1 to 3 ratio. It just depends. Now, one of the things you always get when it comes to light roast coffee, you have that thin body. But don't worry. The main thing here for the coffee to be balanced. When the coffee is balanced, that is your main goal. That is what we actually want. I want your thoughts in the comments below. For now, I say thanks so much for watching and hope you have a great day.